What would happen if the church stressed that urgency? I urge you, I beseech you, brothers and sisters. What if the church gave this regulation the weight that the apostles gave it? Top of the list. Last episode, we looked at modern praise and worship music, and we saw from the scriptures that worship is not even often associated with music at all, but with sacrifice. That is the death and spilling of blood for the remission of sins. And our true worship is as a living sacrifice. But what does that mean? What does it look like to present our bodies as a living sacrifice? Welcome to Morning Tea. Hello, I'm Joanne, Jolee, and I'm so glad you're here. First of all, several of you were kind enough to direct me to Dr. Tom Wadsworth, whose 50-year study on worship was the subject of his doctoral thesis. So if you have any questions at all about worship, I highly recommend that you watch his playlist for a scholarly explanation, and I'm going to put the link down below in the description. So what does a living sacrifice look like? Well, let's start with what a sacrifice looks like. And to the Jewish converts, hearing that they should be offering up themselves as a sacrifice, it may have been unsettling, to say the least. Sacrifice was gross, it was bloody, it was painful, and from the minute they stepped into the temple courtyard for the worship rituals, there was blood, bowls of blood poured out, blood spattered and splattered over everything. Priests' white robes stained with blood. Spurgeon, speaking to his horrified congregation, says, "I wish you to be horrified." Indeed, sin is a thing to shudder at, and the death of Jesus is not a matter to be treated lightly. It was God's intent to awaken in man a great disgust of sin by making him see that it could only be put away by suffering and death. I know of a Messianic fellowship in my hometown that every Passover slaughters a lamb, and this is disturbing. It's a disturbing visual, and it's burned into the minds of the people in the assembly. The animal doesn't want to die. It struggles against being bound and the violence that is about to be inflicted upon it. It tries to escape, but Paul is urgent on this. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. The animal is forced to the altar. It does not survive, but we voluntarily choose to place ourselves on the altar. And our worship is to continually kill and die to our flesh that wages war against us. And true worship can be painful, as we also would like to escape the struggle to kill what self wants so badly and to put aside the things that have mastery over us. I have walked beside an addict who, after decades, finally said no more, and they submitted their will to God. And I just watched that process of the body rebelling and trembling and retching and the cravings for a fix. So powerful, so terrible, they really would have preferred to die. This was their worship, and it was agony. Every day and moment, we're met with situations where we have to decide whether or not we're going to submit our wills in our private acts of worship before God. Even just deciding to get our fat, unhealthy temples into optimal operational order might require some stabbing, hunger pangs, as we decide to say no to food passions. And this submission comes about by the renewing of our minds. This is where it starts. We sacrifice our mindset. We might have to relinquish long-held memories of injustices. We're going to have to take our thoughts captive, put them in chains, the high and mighty thoughts of pride and arrogance, down to the low thoughts of despair and depression, and then offer in that place a sacrifice of praise. Spurgeon, again, is so eloquent, and in his message called Slaying the Sacrifice, "Did sin kill my Savior? Then I will kill sin. Could I not be saved from sin except by his precious blood? Then, O sin, I will be revenged upon thee. I will drive thee out by the help of God's Spirit. I will not endure thee, nor harbor thee. I will make no provision for the flesh. As sin was the death of Christ for me, so Christ shall be the death of sin in me." I want to go a step further here. In Acts 15, there is a problem in the family of the way. We have two cultures colliding, the Jews and the Gentiles. And in the resolution of this conflict, of all the regulations that the apostles could have put forward as prime importance for the new believers, they gave only 3. 2 were related to food and conscience, and the other was no sexual immorality. And Paul puts it into a class all on its own, because sexual immorality is not just sin, but uniquely it is a sin we commit against ourselves. This sin is in a peculiar manner styled uncleanness, pollution, because no sin has so much external turpitude, depravity, in it, especially in a Christian. He sins against his own body. He defiles it. He degrades it, making it one with the body of that vile creature with whom he sins. We should not make our present vile bodies more vile by sinning against them. Of all the sins, sexual sin brings with it more destruction, more pain, more consequence than perhaps anything else. And it's not just to our person, but it's to society as well. When ministers fall, the scandal destroys their testimony and hurts the faith of the people who are looking to them for leadership. Sexual sin in marriage is devastating, with the betrayal and the lying and the deception. The very foundation of trust is severed. Homes are broken, families are decimated. Single mothers and their children are significantly less safe and vulnerable to abuse of all kinds. One of the worst economic positions for a woman is to raise a child alone. And crime increases without the benefit of two invested parents. And we end up with higher rates of substance abuse and gang violence. Fornication brings unwanted pregnancies and abortion and STDs and emotional trauma from the failures, the guilt, the shame. It all ends in depression and hopelessness and even suicide. So let me ask you something. What would happen if the church stressed that urgency? I urge you, I beseech you, brothers and sisters. What if the church gave this regulation the weight that the apostles gave it, top of the list, and then followed it up with the proper rebuke and discipline to enforce this for the good? You know, we have alarming immorality tolerated and winked at in the churches today. Members defraud each other, and this is not love. The world is supposed to know we are believers by our love. What if believers were urged to offer their gender, their sexuality on that altar in their true worship, to put to death whatever belongs to our earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry? And we have at our disposal powerful spiritual weapons with which we can fight and have victory over all our battles. And that's my encouragement for today. So I want to leave you with a clip from Dr. Frank Turek where he elaborates on this. Love and sacrifice, he says it so well. So I hope you enjoy that. Thank you for being here and watching, and I wish you many blessings. Bye-bye.
If your parents approved of everything you wanted to do when you were 13 years old, would they have been loving? No, of course not. Love doesn't mean approval. Love doesn't mean enabling people to do evil. Love means you're standing in the way of evil. If you approve of everything some kid wants to do, you're not loving, you're unloving, you're an enabler. In fact, in the passage that everybody reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys, 1 Corinthians 13, here's what Paul says about love. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, love rejoices in the truth. Love always protects. Love always perseveres. You don't protect people when you're approving of the evil they're doing. You're doing the opposite. Knock it off. In fact, Jesus, who went to the cross for us, gave us one new command. You know what the one new command is? Here it is. He says, a new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. How did he love us? He sacrificed himself for us. So what is love for us? It means sacrifice. It doesn't mean approval. You know, when we fail to say what we know to be true because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, we're not really loving people. We're enabling them to do evil. And a lot of times we won't tell them the truth because we don't want them mad at us. And you know why we do that? Because we want to take the easy way. We will sacrifice them for our benefit rather than sacrificing ourselves for their benefit. That's what love is, to sacrifice yourself for the benefit of others. So you need to tell people what the truth is in as tactful a way as possible. Here's one way you could do it. You might say to somebody you love who, say, is wanting to approve of, say, aberrant sexual practices. They're all over now. You might say to them, hey, if I was about to go down a road you knew that would hurt me and hurt others and would be against God's will, would you love me enough to tell me? What's the other person going to say? Well, of course. Great. Can I do the same for you right now? Love does not mean approval. Thomas Sowell is now 94 years old and says everything well. Put it this way. He said, when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. How often do we tell people what they want to hear? Oh, we don't want to risk the relationship. Well, what kind of relationship do you have anyway if you can't tell them the truth? What are you risking? And by the way, Jesus wasn't always nice. Jesus told people the truth. In fact, if you think Jesus was a nice guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. How often do you hear those passages talked about? But most of you in this room know those passages are true. Why? Because you're divided in your own family over Jesus. Guess what? You ought to be. You ought to be following Jesus and not the world. Jesus did not come to bring unity, not with the world. He came to bring unity in the church, but not the world. So Jesus was tough, and he didn't approve of everything, quite obviously. In fact, if love required approval, then Jesus was unloving. If love required approval, then you couldn't love your children. Now, you love them when they're little, but when they become teenagers, yeah, you love them, but you don't always feel like you love them, right? You probably never thought of abandonment, but you've thought of murder several times. If love required approval, you couldn't love your spouse. You couldn't love your enemies. How do you love your enemies if love requires approval? In fact, God couldn't love you if love required approval. Love does not require approval.